Today's video is going to be all about the 99 to 02 full-size GM clusters. We're going to be going over all the common problems that they are known for, how to correctly identify the problems, and then how to properly fix those problems. So to start off with, we're going to get kind of a basic understanding of how these things work. This cluster has three main sets of required inputs to function. So to start off with the simple basic stuff, for the volt gauge and the oil gauge to work, all it needs is an analog input and power and ground, and that is it. Now for the RPMs and mile per hour to work, it also has an analog input, but it also needs the microcontroller unit, the brains of the unit to be up operational and functioning. Plus it needs power and ground for the RPM and mile per hour to work. Now for the trans temp, engine temp, gas gauge to all work, that signal comes in through the serial bus, not through an analog wire. So it needs not only to see the serial bus signal coming in, but it also needs the microcontroller to be working, and it needs its proper powers and ground. And also same with the message center over here. And for the VFD, for the the odometer to work properly, as far as the gear select goes, that comes in through this serial bus also. The backlighting, turn signals, and the check engine light, they have their own analog separate wires coming in. They don't require the microcontroller to be functional to work. Okay, the first common problem on the list is the cluster is dead or intermittent. But the check engine light continues to work, the oil gauge continues to work, and backlighting and turn signals still work. But the rest of the cluster is the intermittent or dead, and I'll give you an example of what this will look like. So here, if I simulate a bad ground, you go over a bump, you might see it twitching and rebooting or looking like this, but you'll see that the check engine light blinkers are still working. And if I turn off the lights, you'll see the backlighting is still working also. Now this is a bad ground, and to fix this problem, you need to find A8 on the connector. The back of the connector is labeled. If you look closely, you can see an A up in this corner, and it's numbered. You just follow through 8, and the 8 wire is going to be black with a white stripe, and which comes to here. But anyways, you don't need to trace back where this goes to tap into a fresh ground. What I will usually do is just get one of these wire taps, put it around the existing wire that's already there. You don't have to cut it. You just stick the tap around there, get a new fresh ground wire, put it in here, clamp this shut with your pliers, flip the little door shut, and then with this other end of the wire, strip this, and there is a bolt right behind the cluster. That should be a good, clean, fresh ground. So it's just a 5-minute job to tap into a good ground, and that's kind of a recommended thing to do if you're getting any kind of intermittent problems like that. All right, next problem on the list is mile per hour, RPM, and display not working unless the trip button is pushed. Or also, if you're just having like maybe half the cluster working, another half isn't working, or some things are, some things aren't, check your fuses. This trips people up quite often because they're not expecting the cluster to require so many fuses to work, and also the labeling. It's not just labeled black and white as cluster fuse in the fuse box. It might be labeled as ignition or tied into something else. Anyway, there's multiple circuits that this cluster needs. They all have to be up and running for this thing to work right. And that would be the battery orange, which is A9 on the connector. That's your constant power. So you got ignition 1, there's a pink wire labeled B6 on the connector. Your off-run crank volt, second pink wire, that's A10 on the connector. And ignition 3 is a brown wire, which is A4 on the connector. And again, these all have to be powered up and working for the cluster to be fully operational. Next problem, common problem, is the fuel gauge is stuck on E And the low warning indicator up here is showing you low gas. Or if you have an intermittent fuel gauge where maybe it'll read right for a little bit and then you kind of maybe take a corner in the truck and slosh the gas around, then it jumps down to E and then maybe jumps back up. That is all a sign of a failing sending unit in the tank and or wiring to the sending unit. You want to make sure your sending unit has a clean ground, and its signal from the sending unit has to make its way up to the main engine ECU. So if you have a gas gauge reading E with an orange low fuel light, that is your sending unit. And you can also confirm that with a scan tool, which I kind of recommend to do, is see if you can beg, borrow, or steal a scan tool that can talk to the main ECU to confirm what it's trying to say the fuel level is at. So you can compare what the gauge is doing to what the sending unit is trying to say. Okay. Next on the list is no odometer or gear select display, but everything else is working. So actually, this is what it'll look like. All right. So it helps if I reconnect my ground back up. This simulating what a bad ground is, not intended to, but all right. There we go. All right, so if your cluster looks like this is another very common problem. Oop, actually, the display just came up. It's intermittent. Anyways, there it goes. I have to back off again. So if everything's working fine except your display, this is another common problem. This is fractured, bad solder joints on the VFD board. Or resistors. Sometimes if it's dim, you might just have issues with the resistors here, but it's usually fractured at the header pin here. There's already multiple videos out on YouTube on how to fix this problem, but if you are watching a video and you see the guy take and bend this over to get to the backside, please don't do that. These are single-sided boards. It doesn't take much to rip up the foil on the backside of the board. There's not a whole lot of physical strength to these, so the best way to do this is to properly desolder this VFD board, pull it up, get in there, rework everything, and properly solder it back down. Also, another cause of the vacuum fluorescent display not working is this TO220 circuit that's tied in to power the unit. Also, a Q4 transistor and this D1 diode. If those are having issues, the display also won't come on, and also eeprom, but we'll cover that later. Next common problem on the list is the battery indication in the message center is on. That's just the red battery symbol. Now, if that is on, but your volts is reading fine, and if you know your alternator is doing what it's supposed to do, but the red light is on, that is there's a single small wire at the alternator that I've seen corrode and go bad. That is just everything's okay communication wire from the alternator. I believe it just goes in the main engine ECU. But anyways, if that connection is bad on the alternator, that will trip this battery indication, even if the voltage is fine, the battery is charging. So check that. It doesn't require cluster service for that. Next problem that we see from time to time is the airbag warning indicator not working properly. That is just a sign that somewhere along the line somebody installed the wrong cluster. 99 clusters are unique with the airbag, the way the airbag indicator works when compared to the almost identical 2000 to 2002 clusters. Okay, next on the list is dark backlighting, burned out bulbs. You might have some areas look fine, some might be dim. Well, if you made it that far, congratulations, because it usually takes about 250,000 miles for these 194 bulbs to start burning out. To change bulbs yourself, it's easy. It doesn't require send it in for service for changing bulbs. Just unclip your back plastic, and the bulbs are on these twist lock sockets. Give them a twist, they come out. Take this to your local parts store, and chances are they'll probably have some new ones on the shelf. Next common problem is twitchy or bouncy gauges. So, if you have some gauges that are just rapid, twitchy, and not smooth, like example, like this volt one here is nice and smooth. This is the way it should be. And here this gas gauge is is no good. This is going to be kind of bouncy, and same with the mile per hour. RPM needs a little help too. So if you have twitchy gauges, that is because of these air core motors from the factory before, while they're being assembled, before the windings is all put around them, there's a grease put on the disc inside of here that spins, and over time that grease gets dried up because, well, they're right next to some really hot large 194 light bulbs, and over 20 years of being cooked, that lubrication just goes away. And so here's a good gauge. See how it's nice and still has some dampening to it, where this one does not. So in other videos I've gone over to show how to inject oil in down through the shaft, which it helps. It's not as good as factory, because from the factory it's a grease, and an oil doesn't quite dampen it as well, but it's better than nothing. And these motors are hard to find new. Sometimes you can find them, and they're damn near $100 a piece for a genuine brand new air core motor. Next common problem is battery drain. So these clusters consume about 0.6 amps or 600 milliamps when they are not in their sleep mode. There's one wire, which is the orange wire, which is hot all the time. So if you're having your battery going dead and you were able to trace down through this orange wire that the current is continuously being drawn, it's possible that for some reason or another the cluster isn't going into its sleep mode. The security, if it's blinking security over here with the key out, that will keep the cluster awake. So you'll want to look into why your security is being tripped, maybe ignition switch problems or wiring problems. You also want to make sure all these other circuits are off with your key out. Again, it's just the orange wire that should be live with the key out, truck off. And another thing that will wake up the cluster with the key off is if you push a trip button. It will wake up the odometer to show you the odometer value with the key out, and that takes about 6 seconds to wake up and then go back to sleep again. And in sleep mode, it should not be pulling any power. If it is still pulling power with everything else right, then you might have some cluster issues and you'll have to send it off to service or replace it. Next common problem on the list is no odometer display. The gas gauge, engine temp gauge, and or trans temp gauge, if it has one, are not working. And also no bus communication or message center stuck on battery or other odometer issues. These also have odometer error issues in this generation too. But here I have one to simulate that problem. Well, it actually has that problem. This cluster here has a bad eeprom, and it's half working and half not. So the RPM and mile per hour are still working, and the oil is going to work, and the volts is going to work because they don't require a working microprocessor to function properly. Same with RPM and mile per hour. Now, we notice we got some blinks here on the seat belt, but the message center isn't doing its normal cycling through the problems. It's just stuck on battery. There's no odometer display. This cluster has a bad EEPROM. And when the EEPROMs go bad in these, it doesn't really fully boot up properly. And this is what it will look like. Half working, half not. And the final common problem on my list is the volt gauge reading high. These seem to tend to kind of drift higher and higher as they get older and have more hours on them. I'm not exactly sure why. I just know it is tied into R38, which is supposed to be a 86.6 ohm, 1% tolerance, which I believe a half watt resistor. Well, the drift could also be coming from the air core motor itself. I know it has some magnets in here that can get moved around. I believe they don't always stay glued in place. I'm not exactly sure what's causing the drift, but usually what I'll do is during our refurbish is I'll just recalibrate or reseat the needle in the correct position, and that seems to take care of that. So here's the list one more time. Again, this is unique only to 99 to 02 full-size GM clusters. If you have a different year and it's not on this list, it's going to have different fixes for different problems. And anyways, there's my email, and hopefully this list will give you an idea on what you can fix yourself and what really requires it to be sent off to be serviced and fixed. So I think that's it for this video, guys. Thanks for watching.